This video contains the instructions for the 1/12 scale attic trunk kit from Bentley House Minis. If you're interested in this kit, you can find it at bentleyhouseminis.com and click on the listing for more details and pricing. This kit comes with 2 sheets of laser cut mat board, 1 sheet that has cardstock details, 1 toothpick, and 1 strip of fabric, plus your instruction sheet. All of this will come together to create one attic trunk kit. Be sure to have a sharp blade in your craft knife so you can easily cut through the tabs, holding all the pieces in place. We're going to start with pieces C1, there's 2 of these, and C2. There are also 2 pieces marked with C2. The big difference between pieces C1 and C2 is a little notch in the side. You're going to glue one C1 piece on top of one of the C2 pieces. So you're going to have 2 total pieces combined with 1 of each. Line up the edges as best as possible and let them dry under something heavy and flat. This will keep them from warping from the liquid in the glue. I'm using 1-2-3 blocks, but a book works just as well. Now I'm going to work with pieces A, B1, and B2. A is going to be the bottom of your trunk, B1 is the back, and B2 is the front. I'm also going to be using the side pieces that we just created out of piece C. B2 has the keyholes, so this is going to be the front of your trunk. It technically doesn't matter which side of the base you put this onto. You're going to add glue and make sure all the tabs line up and interlock with each other. Now I can add on one of the side pieces. Make sure that the indentions in piece C1 are facing to the interior of the trunk. These 2 pieces that we just glued on are going to support each other at the corner. Again, make sure that the tabs on the base fit into the tabs on the side pieces, as you can see here. Now I can add the other B piece in place. This is going to be the back of the trunk, and then finally add the other side piece. Again, making sure that the indentions in C1 are facing to the interior. Now I can remove piece D from my mat board sheet. There are 2 of these pieces, and each one is going to be inserted into the cutouts that you previously saw in piece C1. This is a little bit easier to do with a pair of tweezers since it is such a tight fit. Add some glue and carefully push piece D tabs into the reveals in piece C1. You're going to do this for both sides of the trunk. Eventually, this is going to be the supports for your trunk tray that will sit at the top of the trunk body. Now we can create the lid from piece E, 2 pieces marked F and 2 pieces marked G. These are going to go together similarly to the way we did the body, where you're adding the long pieces along the long edge, making sure it interlocks with the tabs on the base piece, and then add the short pieces along the short sides. When they come together at the edge, add some glue so that they connect to each other. And this should fit perfectly on top of the trunk body, as you see here. Now we can move on to creating the tray from pieces H, 2 pieces marked I, 2 pieces marked J, and piece K. These pieces go together just like we did the trunk lid, with the long pieces along the long sides and the short pieces along the short sides, adding glue to the corners so that everything comes together. The only addition to this piece will be a handle that you can put anywhere inside the tray. You can center it exactly in the middle. I am going to put mine off center just because I like the look of that. Simply add glue to all 3 edges that are going to touch the inside of the tray. Make sure it is straight and let it dry. You do want to make sure it dries completely before you put it into the trunk body, because if there's any excess glue, it could accidentally glue it in place. But once everything's complete, it should fit together like this. The lid will fit on top even with the tray in place. Now that we are done with all of the mat board pieces, we can move on to the cardstock. We're going to start with this lock section up in this corner. You want to keep this cut out for later on in the project. We're putting them together in this order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. First, glue pieces 1 and 2 together so that they match perfectly. Piece 3 is going to be glued on top of those so that pieces 1 and 2 block the opening. I'm adding a little extra glue on the back so that these pieces are thoroughly glued together. Once that's done, I can flip it back over, and I am going to glue pieces 4 on top of the keyhole, and then finally piece 5. To double check that your keyhole is perfectly lined up, you can use the toothpick provided in your kit, and you're going to end up making 2 total of these upper locks. The lower locks consist of 2 pieces plus these extra pieces you cut out from the upper locks. If you want to add them, they're not necessary. I'm going to add some glue around the keyhole and add the smaller piece on top of the larger piece. And then you can add one of these cutouts to the bottom if you want to add some extra detail. You're making 2 of these lower locks. Now we can add them to the trunk. The lower locks are going to go on the face of your trunk, making sure to line up the keyholes. Again, you can use your toothpick to make sure that the holes are lined up correctly. You're going to add 1 to each side of the trunk, and this completes your lower locks. The upper locks are going to be attached to the lid, so in order to make sure everything lines up correctly, I highly suggest using some masking tape to tape your lid onto your trunk since it's not yet attached. You're only going to add glue to the very small pieces at the top of the upper locks. Do not add glue to the lower part because it will glue your lock together. I'm using my toothpick to make sure that the keyholes line up, and then I'm going to add my upper lock so that the glue touches the lid and press it down. I'm doing this for both sides of my trunk so that I can get a very accurate fit. So once the trunk lid is connected and it opens and closes, it will look as though my locks are coming together. Once that's done, I can carefully remove my masking tape so that I don't rip my mat board, and then I'm going to separate these pieces. Just in case there was any excess glue, I do not want these locks to glue to each other. So they're just going to rest separately as they dry completely. Now I can start working on the details on the edges. I'm first removing the bottom strip of paper because it's not the same size as the rest of the strips. And then I'm going to remove 3 or 4 at a time by cutting along the edges. And this is, you can remove as many as you like, but I just do 3 or 4 at a time so I don't lose them. And then I'm going to glue them along the horizontal edges of my trunk. This is going to cover up the tabs and make it look like there's more detail on your piece. I'm adding a bit of glue with a toothpick so I have a very thin line, and then I can add my cardstock along the edge. Once it's dry, I can use some kind of clippers or my craft knife to remove the excess. The only place where this is a little complicated is having to use the edge around where the locks are installed. I use a sharp pencil to mark where I need to cut the edges, and then I cut them to size and glue them in place. This only needs to happen around the locks. Everywhere else will just be a strip of paper that goes along the edge. I'm going to do all the horizontal lines of the trunk so that it looks like this. Next, I can work on the vertical edges that are going to go along every single corner of this trunk. So each corner is going to get 2 strips of paper. I'm cutting these to fit, although if they don't fit perfectly, some of this will be covered up by corner pieces later on. Once they're installed, it looks like this. It's up to you if you want to cover the edges of the bottom of the trunk. There are enough strips to do that, but I'm going to leave mine plain. Now I can move on to the lid of the trunk. I'm going to do the same thing with all the horizontal pieces that are going to go around the horizontal edges. Again, I'm going to have to custom fit them around the locks, but other than that, they're pretty straightforward. I am not going to have to do the vertical edges because those are going to be covered by corner details, so I can leave those plain. Even though the bottom of the trunk was optional, I highly suggest covering the edges of the top of the trunk because that will be seen very well. I'm going to follow the same steps where I'm covering up the edges with these strips of cardstock. This is how both the lid and body of your trunk should look after you have it completely covered with the cardstock strips. This is going to add a lot of finishing detail to your project, so it's worth the time it takes to get it done. You will have plenty of these strips left over, so you can add additional details if you would like. However, I'm going to leave mine plain. Now I can move on to these corner pieces I'm showing you here. They look like an L shape. They're going to go in each corner at the top and bottom of the trunk. I'm going to cut them free from my cardstock sheet, and then I'm going to fold them along the dotted lines as you see here. It will kind of make a cube shape, but a cube that's only covered on 3 sides. This is going to be the perfect corner protector for my trunk. I'm going to make 8 of these. 4 of them are going to go on the top of the lid, and 4 of them are going to go on the bottom of the trunk body. I add glue to the interior and press it firmly onto the corner, making sure that the edges meet and come together. Once it's painted, you won't be able to see if there's any gaps, but if there's too big of a gap, you will be able to see it. I'm going to do this on all 4 corners of the lid, and then all 4 corners of the bottom, as I previously stated. There are 4 more pieces that are more of a rectangle. Those are going to be folded in half and then added to the remaining corners. They sit flush with the top opening of the trunk so they don't interrupt the closing of the lid. You're going to glue them around the remaining 4 corners, making sure that they stick down to the face of the mat board. Once that's complete, you have all your corners covered and your details are pretty much done. Now it's finally time to connect these pieces together. We are going to be using a paper hinge. However, if you want to purchase your own metal hinges and upgrade that part of the kit, you are welcome to. We are going to be gluing this to the fabric that came in your kit in order to strengthen it to last over time. I pre-folded my cardstock strip in both directions before adding some glue. I'm going to glue this straight onto the fabric and allow it to dry. By folding it first, it's going to give it more mobility once it's attached to my trunk and I don't have to work so hard to get the trunk open. Once it's dry, I'm going to carefully cut around the cardstock piece, removing any excess fabric. I don't want my fabric to stick out past the cardstock. Before applying it to the trunk, I am going to fold it lengthwise one more time to make sure I've cracked any stubborn glue that got a little bit too globby. Just like we did when adding the locks, I am going to temporarily attach the lid to the body of the trunk so that I can make sure the hinge goes in the right spot. I'm going to add a healthy amount of glue, not so much that it will seep through the crack, but enough that it will get a good hold, and then center it on the back of my trunk, making sure it is firmly pressed up against both the mat board and the cardstock that we applied as details. I'm adding a heavy weight to the top so that it will dry with it closed. If I don't add the weight, it may pop open during drying and be a little bit difficult to work with. Let this dry for at least a couple hours before opening your trunk. You're going to open it carefully at first, but once you get it open, it should open easily, and then you may have it pop up a little bit, which you can work with, and I will show you how you can lock it down later in the video. But for now, we're going to move on to the painting stage. You can, of course, paint this any way you want. However, I am going to be painting this with a green, and I'm going to cover the entire thing with a base coat. I'm even covering the locks and the details because I'm going to be painting those after the base coat is finished. I have found it easiest to do the details with a detail brush that is turned to the side. By doing it this way, my brush only hits the highlighted details of the cardstock and it makes a nice clean line. This just takes a little time and patience to go around all the edges, adding your detail. I'm first laying down a layer of gray and then I'm going to go over it with some silver so that I have a nice bright silver look for my hardware. To create the handles for the side of the trunk, I'm going to remove these long, thin pieces that are pointed at the end. You need 2 pieces per handle. Glue them on top of each other so you have a double thickness. There's enough to make 3 handles, but I am making 2. While the glue is still drying, I'm forcing them into a handle shape, which is something like a shallow U with 2 pieces sticking out on either side. I'm going to let that dry completely, and then I can coat it with a layer of paint before I glue it to my trunk. It's easier to paint these first because you're going to be able to get the interior of the handle before it's glued down and a little bit harder to get to. I added glue to either pointed end that's flattened out and glued it to the side of my trunk. I centered it in the space, but you can of course attach it wherever you would like. I'm now going to take these smaller triangular pieces and slightly round them so that the top of this piece looks like it's a bit curved. This is going to make it easier to fit over the side of my handle. I'm adding a little bit of glue to the interior, using some tweezers and placing it over the edge of my handle. You can pre-paint these pieces, but I decided to paint them like the other hardware after it was attached to the trunk. This is what it looks like once they're applied correctly to the handles, and then I painted them. As another option for detail, you can use a pointed tool to push small indentions into the paper hardware. This will make it look as though there are small nails that have been pushed into the hardware to attach it to the trunk. I did this for all the corners, for the locks on the front, and along the back side where the hinge is. But of course, it's up to you. I decided to age this trunk with some watered down acrylic paint. I'm going over the top of my base coat and my hardware so that everything looks like it has some dirt and grunge that's built up in the edges. This is really going to bring out some of those details that I've previously put a lot of work into. As you're painting, make sure you keep the locks separate from each other so they don't accidentally dry shut. Another option is to add some paper to your tray and to the top lid of the trunk. I'm marking off with a pencil how big this piece of wallpaper needs to be and gluing it straight into the bottom of the tray. I did the same for the back of the trunk, and now I have a matching tray and trunk lid, and it just gives a bit more interest when the trunk is open. By using some of these designing options, you can really personalize your trunk and make it your own. You can make it look old or you can make it look new. You can add papers inside that really draw the eye and start to tell the story of what this piece of furniture is really for. If you want your trunk lid to stay open, you can use the toothpick in your kit as a type of support. Just chop off the ends and paint it to match your trunk. You can also keep this inside your trunk for safe storage when not in use. If you're having the opposite problem where your trunk lid keeps popping up and you want it to stay closed, I'll show you how to lock it down. Because the keyhole cut goes all the way through the cardstock and the mat board, you can use that to your advantage with the tip of your toothpick. If you cut off the pointed end, you can use a pair of tweezers to push it through the hole. And if you paint this piece of toothpick black, no one will even know it is there. You can do this for both locks, and this will lock it in place. This will keep your lid shut. However, if you do want to open it again, all you have to do is take your fingernail, lightly pull the upper lock forward, and this will release it from the lower lock, and you can take the toothpick piece out. Again, you can store this inside of your trunk if you want to keep it, so that you have options on whether it is opened or closed. I do not suggest this as a play piece because it is made with paper hinges, so it is more for an adult collector that will be putting it in a scene and styling it, rather than a play piece for a child's dollhouse. Thank you for watching the instructional video. If you're interested in this kit and have not purchased one yet, you can go to bentleyhouseminis.com to learn more. And if you already have purchased it, thank you for your purchase from my store, and happy creating!